When we start, we'll be like, and action.
Yeah. You just roll into it.
Hold on. Do I look ghosty?
No.
No, you look better. Before you did. You look so professional.
And this one,
Nice.
to be or not to be Latina.
I need a Xanax. I need a fucking drink. I need a lot of things.
Oh, we were, on Monday, we had margaritas in our hands. But the next day, like maybe 3 a.m, my stomach started to kill me because it had fresh mango in it. And I guess alcohol. I just don't like the stomach pain.
Yeah.
Because I feel like passing out. We're just going to talk about growing up Latina and our experiences, with physically our troubles.
Yeah. Identity.
So because we are 3 Latinas and named our podcast Latina Loud, we thought it would be good to talk about cultural identity today and racial identity because it is something that does impact your self-esteem, your sense of self growing up. And a lot of that has to do with how you were raised, what your parents taught you, how your home life was, and also the environment, the school districts you go to, the cities you grow up in, your suburbs. And I think that as a Latina, we will all share our experiences, but I wanted to kind of share a little bit about my work since that is my demographic, working with people of color, and how even though we are addressing other things, how the impact of how they grew up is so important and was excluded out of the therapy room for so long. And, we weren't represented. There weren't enough people of color that were therapists. So now that that number is increasing, we are finding that asking how you grew up, what your view is of your cultural identity, what your view is of your culture in general. Were you the only person of color in your school district? And how did that impact you? Did you feel like you didn't belong because you are maybe considered yourself bicultural, meaning you grew up here, but you have parents from a different country? Did you feel excluded in certain groups? Or did you feel proud of what you were and saw yourself in other people because they grew up the same way or they had a tie to their own culture? And I think these are questions and these are things that we really are starting to talk about a lot more in the last few years and how much they can impact your self-worth, your self-esteem, your sense of self, really. In your 20s, I think your late teens, kids start to really question their cultural identity and like, who are they? What parts of them do they gravitate to? And part of that can be culture, part of that can be race, and how the outside world can impact that on you and how you feel. And I think like one example is like the Nuyorican, right? That is a funny term, but I think it encompasses a lot of the Puerto Ricans that came to New York City and really embraced the Puerto Rican culture, but were born and raised, and me being one of them. And I think there's a lot of pride with that, but there's also, things that we experience. Like, am I Puerto Rican enough in Puerto Rico when I go to Puerto Rico? Like, I remember somebody called me gringa and I'm like, who are they talking to? I'm not a white girl, and I think that that's an example like, well, you're not really Puerto Rican because you're from the States, or being in the States and no one thinks I'm a white girl, so nobody thinks I'm Caucasian. So I'm like, but I could have taken that and I could have felt like that I didn't belong. The only reason I think I didn't was because I was raised in New York City. And a lot of my friends were from different cultures, not even just Puerto Rican, but like Dominican. And I had a Persian best friend in middle school, and I had Black friends, and I had everything, or they had a different culture at home and they learned how to navigate that, which is really the bicultural experience. So today we want to just share a little bit about that as far as our own experience and how they vary.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood, Roosevelt, Long Island, and the school system was not good. My parents worked hard to send me to Catholic school, and it was in a town called Rockville Center, and it was called St. Agnes, which was predominantly white, a lot of Irish. So, it was kind of like I felt like I didn't fit in, even though I didn't quote unquote look Latina. They labeled you where you came from, your school district. You're already labeled as poor. The fact that I had hair on my body, the arm hair, the leg hair, the big eyebrows, I was made fun of a lot. I remember even being called fat, and you'll see in a picture later, I was not even close. I didn't gain weight till my mid-30s. And like, maybe 6th grade, I stopped eating, and my friends got the principal involved, that the principal came down and made me eat. Like, that's how bad it was. And I was already thin. And it was probably, I was taller. I was breasts. I was more voluptuous than the rest of everyone. So I was called fat. I also remember sitting at the dining table with one of my friends who lived in Rockville Center. And her mother tells me at the table, you don't have to worry about anything. You're lucky. You don't look Spanish. They use that word Spanish, like whatever, like blanketed. You don't look Spanish. And I remember that I could play that reel in my head. It just stuck with me. So I then proceeded to say that I was Italian. I negated that I was Latina. It really, really screwed with my mind. And I also dropped the A from my name and called myself Susan. It was just a lot. So I had a rough time there. I never said anything. My mom didn't know. My father didn't know. Fast forward to high school, which was in Uniondale, Kellenberg, which was it was a Catholic school in Long Island. And I wasn't Latina enough there. I tried, I didn't fit the profile of dark skin, the hair, or just this look. You were either Mexican or Puerto Rican or Dominican. Nobody knew anything about South America. It was always a, geographical lesson where my parents were from. And I tried hard to look the part then, the red lipstick, the big earrings. So it was so difficult because now I'm going from one extreme to the other. And, it took me a while. Like I didn't know what I was supposed to be. Like I'm not Latina enough or then I want to be it. I was trying so hard to look it. It took me a long time to accept who I was. I feel like I'm unique. The fact that I speak Spanish and I love my culture, I love my name. But it took me a long time to get here, well into college. So when college, Stony Brook came around, I was like, oh, okay, there's people like me. Even today, I wax my body from here to here because of the hair issue. Like hair bothers me. It was a lot of years of that struggle.
Yeah, I think for me, so my dad is Irish, but he grew up in the city. He grew up in the Harlem area in the projects. He was raised by a single mom. It was just him and his brother. She worked in a factory. So that part of me, I don't really know much about. Even my grandmother that came over from Ireland, she maybe had one cousin that I knew of growing up, and she's from 14 kids. So I don't know if they just died young. I don't know the story. She wouldn't really say much about it. So really the only Irish culture I had growing up was St. Patty's Day. We celebrated that and that was it. But my mom, she was born and raised in Puerto Rico. She came to New York in probably middle school, and she's from a family of farmers. So her family in Puerto Rico, they all owned farms. So, she would talk about before school in the morning, we'd have to get the eggs and the coffee beans and all of that. And the kids and the moms went out and did the stuff on the farm, and then they would go to school. And then after school, they had to do other stuff. And she talks about that. And then she talked about, when she came here, and her family was really close. So there was a lot of them on both sides, her mother and father side. Everybody was a cousin. There was just so many people. Everybody was a cousin. And they moved to New York together, where a couple of my uncles bought buildings and they all lived in these buildings in the Upper West Side. And she said they would go from apartment to apartment. Everybody was family. And so her best friends growing up were her cousins. So I always picture, sitting on the stoop and the tia out the window and the kids outside playing, that type of thing. But she said that she didn't know English when she came. She went to Catholic school, which was run by nuns. She said they were really strict. And she said, because she's a little mischievous, that she would, even though she was learning English, she would do things on purpose because she was a little naughty and then pretend she didn't understand. But then she also said, you're growing up and it's New York City, right? And there's a lot of racism and all of that growing up. And she said because she looked light skinned, eventually she would try to get rid of the accent, learn English, fit in, assimilate to whatever, because my mom never wanted to get married and have kids. I guess growing up and everything she saw, she was like, that's not the life for me. So she was really a woman before her time. And she kind of went to school. She worked in a bank. She made money. She bought a car before she could even drive, because back then, if you had a car, it was a luxury. She went with her uncle to buy the car, because again, back then women couldn't get loans and things like that by themselves, right? She goes, okay, now you're going to teach me how to drive and we're going to go to the cemetery. They're all dead there already. So my mom didn't really get married till her early to mid 30s. And so she had me and my brother older. And her family moved from the city to the Bronx. And again, they all moved to the Bronx. And so again, me growing up, I could walk to my aunt's house. I could walk to my cousin's house. It was all the family parties. It was always everybody together. My aunt lived across the street from church, and that's where everybody got married, baptized, went to school. Me and my cousins all went to the same Catholic school. And we would, after church, go visit my cousin or go visit my aunt because they lived across the street, and everybody lived in the neighborhood. So for me, I grew up in the South Bronx, so it was a predominantly, Latin and Black people. I think there was 2 Irish families in my school. I was like, oh, I'm Irish too. But I didn't really, just because I was so immersed. Everything was the music, the food, everything was Puerto Rican. I went to Puerto Rico twice a year. I went all summer. I never spent a summer in New York City. We went for the whole summer. And then we always went for one holiday because my mom's parents and her siblings, everybody went back to Puerto Rico. And we had the same house for many years. 4 generations lived in that Bronx house. And so
The one
all
that
of
I
that
went
was
to?
beautiful.
The one that I
The
know?
Bronx house, yeah. My
Wow.
grandparents were the original owners, and then my mom took it over, and then I took it over.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, had my kids there. So that was their first home. So, I think that that's beautiful to have that connection, but it wasn't until I went to high school. But now it's kids from all over. And that was the first time I think someone called me white. And I came home and I was like, everybody at school's treating me weird. Like they're saying that, oh, you're white. Like if it was a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know how to take that. And my 2 best friends, we were 3 peas in a pod. We were always together. And they were like, you're not white. And I'm like, apparently, like it was so foreign for me because everybody just was everybody. Like for me growing up, everybody accepted everybody. Even people that married out that were like my mom married an Irishman. He was part of the family. Like my grandmother loved him. The ladies loved him. He was always joking around and stuff. So for me, it was really a culture shock for me in high school. And I remember just drawing this line in the sand and saying, okay, because that was always a thing that would annoy me where people would be like, oh, what are you?
Mm-hmm.
You get that question, or people would introduce me and be like, oh, this is my friend Sam. Don't worry, she's down. She's Puerto Rican. And I'm like, why would you have to introduce me like that? And I remember in my mind drawing kind of this line in the sand and saying, I don't want people to accept me for what I represent. I want people to accept me for me and who I am, who Samantha is. And I'm going to treat everybody that way. And so I moved forward like that, where like all my friends were every culture. I was interested in culture, their food. My top 3 foods are like Korean, Mediterranean,
Yep.
Indian. Like show me your culture, show me your food, show me your music. Like I'm interested in it. And so I find people's cultures and everything fascinating. And I always accepted everybody. Even to this day, people are like, oh, what are you? Like my athletes are always trying to guess what I am. And I'm like, what do you think I am? And I always get Italian. They're like, you're Italian. And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, you're definitely Hispanic then, like something. And I'm like, okay, so they try to guess. But I always tease them because the first thing out of my mouth is, I'm American. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, if you're from Germany, you're German, right? If you're from France, you're French. So I'm from America, I'm American. And so I do that just to kind of mess with them or whatever. But they usually eventually figure it out.
I used to play that game too.
Yeah.
I got Greek, I got Jewish, I got Italian, I got all sorts of things.
Yeah, and even for my kids now, my husband's Black, so it's like I tell my kids, I'm like, you're everything, because even my husband's grandparents and stuff like that, like there's mix in his family, and I said, you're everything. So you accept everybody, let everybody accept you, but I know it was very different from Melissa.
Very different. I grew up in New York City in Manhattan, and I'm light skinned. There's privilege there too, in a lot of ways. I didn't see the racism until I got older, and I was with Jose, and Jose, my husband, was darker skinned and Dominican, and I could see, the things that I knew happened, but that I didn't necessarily experience. Although one time I was told, I never heard of a Puerto Rican girl play the cello. So I got stupid comments like that, but I ignored them. And I think growing up in New York City, I also, like Samantha, I spent my summers in Puerto Rico, very tied to the Puerto Rican culture. My dad grew up in New York City, but he was first generation from Spain. Like he was raised here. And so I did have my grandma and a couple of other family members, but I was definitely more in tune with my Puerto Rican side because I went there every summer. And growing up in New York City, all my friends were of different ethnicities. And when we asked the question, what are you? It was more like excitement, like, oh, what are you? Like not, it was never in a derogatory way. It was never in a, I think nowadays people can ask it in a derogatory way. But for my experience in New York City, it was more like, like, where are you, where are your parents from? Or where are you from? And I'm like, well, I'm from here, but my parents are from these countries or whatever. And my identity was really strong because I saw myself with other people. So there were a lot of first generation Latinos or other cultures. Like one of my friends was from Zambia, Africa. Another one was from Iran. She was Persian. A few were black, a few were white. I mean, it was everything. And then I went to LaGuardia High School, which was a very diverse school because you came from all over the city. So I feel like it was relatively positive. I think when I went to college and I learned my privilege as a light-skinned Latina, but also as the things that really our cultures went through. I minored in Puerto Rican studies. Then I really got into more of my culture because now I understand what the history. And I think I wanted to kind of push back on the whole thing with you don't look Latina. You don't look, because I feel like if you're too light skinned or you're too dark skinned, you don't look Latina or Latino or Latinx or Latinx, whatever word you want to use. And I don't think first of all, that's ignorance because you don't know our genetic makeup, right? So yes, there are countries that may have more European influence, maybe Argentina, but still there's a lot of indigenous and African ancestry in most Latino countries, if not all. And so for us to say you don't look blah, 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 I mean, I understand if there's an additional culture like you, Sam, with being Irish, I get that piece, but regardless, you could still be Puerto Rican just looking like you as you are. And so I think that that's also the piece that kind of annoys me because I'm like, there's no such thing of you don't look blah, blah, blah. Like there's no such thing because we look like everything. And then like there's this meme in Facebook that says, you don't look Puerto Rican. And then the woman goes, the reel says, what am I supposed to look like? Rice and a bean, like rice. And a bean. It's like, what am I supposed to look like? You know what I mean? And so I think that that's first and foremost the education around what we even look like or what we're supposed to look like and how we're supposed to act, right? But again, for me, it was relatively positive because it's New York City. But I do have clients who struggled when they were the only person of color or they were bullied. I mean, I think it varies. And I think what you spoke of, Susana, with assimilating, it's really out of survival, right? I don't want to get bullied.
Yeah.
I don't want someone to mistreat me.
Right.
And I think that goes way back, even with some parents, because my parents didn't do this, but a lot of parents do this. And that was survival. I come to this country. My mother came to this country in her 20s as a nurse. She was already a professional and she was ridiculed and set up to fail as a nurse in Columbia Presbyterian Hospital because she spoke limited English. And so instead of these American nurses helping her, they ridiculed her and set her up to fail. Now, why would you set someone up to fail who's a nurse who can hurt a patient?
Right.
And so all these things were happening. So she went home and my dad would say, you need to learn, you need to be more fluent in English, which she was, but she had, she had just gotten here and she came over to work and it's like, well, I need to really learn how to defend myself because it was just, the racism was really strong, was really bad. It still is. So, I mean, I think those are experiences that I remember hearing. My dad was light skinned. So my dad was in the military and my dad would have black friends, all ethnicities. And he would have to go in, his friends would have to go through the back and he would be allowed to go in through the front of a club or something in like another state because it's the 60s. I mean, people forget how recent this is, right?
Yeah.
And my dad would be like, F you, I'm going with my friends. And he would be like, why can't they come in? And then they'd be like, it's the law. And so he would go in the back with them or on the side door. There are a lot of stories like that in my home. And I think that I was fortunate that my parents were very like, you don't mistreat anybody. My mother was tan skin. So when she met my dad and found out my dad was from Spain, she's like, I'm not putting up with no racism. So you better tell your parents, or which my grandparents weren't, my grandmother was not alive, but his godmother, who was like his mom, his other relatives, like, you better tell them that I'm not putting up with that shit. That's what she said. And I'm so proud of her for that, because she passed that down to me, you know? She passed that love for my culture in a way where it, you know, I mean, growing up in New York City helped, but where that really said, no matter what, I'm still proud of who I am or what I am. And part of that was because I got that from my parents. My parents were really big on that. And so I think that, I mean, I think your parents, the family environment, your school district, whether you were bullied or not, whether you were the only one or not, I think all of that makes such a difference. And I mean, I see it with my clients, I see it with my friends, I see it, you know, we all have just our own personal stories around it. And I think it's important to talk about. I think we really need to be, you know, there's no set way. And I think the education around what we actually look like, what we're supposed to look like,
Right.
is really rooted in just misinformation or ignorance, or people not really knowing or thinking they know, but they don't know.
And I think that's what led to my confusion too, because, you know, I would go to Puerto Rico and my cousins were everything. I had cousins that were whiter than me with blue eyes and red hair.
Mm-hmm.
And I had other cousins that were darker skin, like, and everybody was a cousin. Like for me, it wasn't even, I wasn't aware of it till I got older. And I was really confused. Like, what is everybody talking about? And even, you know, like you said, my dad also was in the military. He was in the Navy, and he tells the story of how they came in, you know, how the Navy comes in for like Fleet Week
Yeah.
into New York City. And he came and he had a buddy, and he was going to bring him home to see his mom and his brother. And the guy was black, and the cab driver wouldn't take both of them.
Damn.
He couldn't take a white guy and a black guy in the same cab. And my dad was so mad. You know, so there were all those things too. And I think for me also, and you know, I don't know if it's a race thing or a woman thing, but you know, my aunts were very critical.
Mm.
You know, very critical about everything, the color of your skin, your hair texture, all of that. I remember being at the beach in Puerto Rico, and one of my aunts, she's like caressing my arm, and I'm like, and I was like 12, and she goes, "You have so many freckles." She's like, "You're rusty." Yeah,
I'm
and it was
sorry.
like,
I
oh,
never heard that one before.
me neither. And I was like, she's like, "Your skin is rusty," and I was like, okay, you know. So it was like always my aunts, because there were so many, you know, they were all like, "Oh my God, you're too skinny, you're too fat, you're too this, you're too that." It was always some judgment and some criticism with how you looked. And even my mom, you know, when I first started dating, I mean, you guys know, when I first started dating my husband, and my parents gave me such a hard time, and it was really based in fear. And they're like, "No, no, 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 you can't date a black man." And I'm like, "But you're a mixed couple. Like, that doesn't even make sense." And my mom would say, "We're not upset that you're dating a black guy. It's just that you're too white." She's like, "If you looked more Hispanic, you'd get less." And she was just like, "You know, your dad and I had to deal with that, being mixed." And she goes, "We don't want that for you." And I'm like, "So I have to go find a Puerto Rican Irishman?" Like, I don't understand. Like, you know, I've dated all kinds of guys, so what does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was always like a big fight in the beginning.
And I
That
think
was
at
it.
this, I think in this, especially now, but I mean forever, we have to recognize Latinos or Latinx groups of people, or South Asian or Indian or Asian, the racism in our own communities, because that's facts. And so I think like we want to historically, I mean, we were colonized, right? And stripped of our indigenous and African ancestry, like, you know, kind of erased to say that Spaniard is what you aspire to look like, which is ridiculous. But it's true. It's a fact. And I think that you see it with hair comments. You know, you see it with, you know, when I had my hair's curly. So you see when I was younger, but my mother would say, "You look like a crazy woman with that curly hair." And she would always straighten my hair. And it was fine because she just straightened my hair. She never said anything with it. But then I saw all the Puerto Rican women with curly hair had straight hair, even in like humidity. I'm like, how do you do that? How do you like have straight hair in 90-degree weather with humidity? That's like weird to me. Like, I don't get it. You see all my cousins, they all have straight hair. And I think that maybe that's not intentional. Maybe that's not to say white is right, but those are the messages that are sent. I mean, I have a lot of friends who happen to be of a particular South American country who are told to marry a white man to adelantar la raza, which is let's get the race better. Let's white it up.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that these are things that we hear, and these are things that we were gaslit to believe. And I think some people fall for it more than others. And I think that we need to really change that and be conscious when we hear these comments to correct our family members, because they are always that. And even if some of our relatives aren't intentionally racist or, be trying to say these are the things that were passed down, and it's up to us to break cycles and to kind of end that. And I think at this point, we can't just blame white people for racism. We really need to own what is really being said and done in our own communities. And I think that there's privilege in being lighter skinned. However, that doesn't mean that, we don't struggle in other ways. It just means that when you go out into the real world, there's so much racism in this country. These are things that happen all the time. I think we don't talk about these things enough to really say this is how we break cycles, by having these conversations and making effort to really address some of these comments that you hear that are still pervasive in our communities.
Yeah, and I think I remember growing up with my mom, because my mom would try to put some of those ideas in my head, and I would always fight with her. And, I remember being a teenager and be like, I'm going to marry a black man just to spite you. And then when I started dating my husband and it was getting serious, she was like, are you doing this to spite me? And I'm like, listen, I said that as a kid. Like, I'm an adult now. Like, no, I'm not living my life to prove a point to you. And we would get into arguments all the time because she was always like, well, what is this person? And there was a lot of stereotypical characteristics or whatever associated to different races. And my mom would be able to tell, she would go, what's their last name? Because she would be able to tell their origin by their last name. Like, that's how so programmed it was in her mind. And I would fight with her all the time. And I remember when I was dating my husband, his family's they were from England, and they're like, we have cousins of all colors. And I've met cousins of him that are second cousins, and they're blonde hair and blue eyes. And I'm like, wait a minute, they're like, this is normal over there. Mm-hmm. And they're like, don't worry, if when you guys have kids, your kids could be green, your parents are going to love them. Thankfully, it all got resolved long before that, but it took them a long time. And it was really just their fear. It was their fear of me being able to withstand criticism. And I would always say, don't you think you raised me enough to be able to speak up for myself, to put another person in their place? I've been fighting you my whole life. You don't think I can fight somebody else outside? I think I can stand up for myself.
And also, how is giving you a hard time of wanting not to be with him and excluding him from things going to help? It's not going to help.
I was like, you're doing the exact thing that was done to you. You know how that feels. And that would be my argument all the time. I'm like, you're doing, because my mom would say, my dad's mom kind of looked down at her for being Puerto Rican. And she lived with us for 12 years. Boy. So, my mom always had that in her mind, but my mom also was a very unforgiving person. So once you did something to her, you were stuck with that for the rest of your life. And so, she'd never let that go, that she was looked down upon for being Puerto Rican. And she always held that against my grandmother. And I just was like, for me being a cycle breaker, there was a lot of things that I had to break down, from the racism to the negative comments to some of the cultural things that just was a lot.
Yeah, I didn't have that. I didn't have that problem. I never was told who to date, who not to date. I predominantly dated Latino men. I had a Dominican boyfriend when I was 15, 16, and Mexican in high school, another Dominican, Salvadorian. So I never had that
Me neither.
issue with being told not to date a certain race or whatever. But I don't have kids to pass that down to, so I can't break any cycle. But yeah, no, I grew up, open-minded. I was never told you can't date, you can't marry this type of person, that type of person. So I was lucky with that. But I know my mother had struggles, and I didn't know because she has an accent. Well, both my parents had an accent, but my mother never told me she always struggled with that. When she moved here and working, she always felt inferior because of her accent. I go, Mommy, you sound beautiful. I love your accent. I don't, it doesn't bother me. And I remember when I was going to prom, we got together at this one girl's house, and they were Italian, but my mom was invited there, and they shunned her. And I didn't know this until years later, and they didn't include my mother, and my mother just left. She's like, I felt like, she shooed me off because I have, my accent. It broke my heart because she's the most wonderful person you would ever meet. She is the nicest. That's that. I remember going to your house, Melissa. I would trek from the LIRR. I was going to take the 109 to 137, get out and walk to 141st.
Like
I roll. Oh man.
no, the
Oh my
harassment
God.
in that walk.
The harassment, man. And then when I snap back at them with, with Spanish, they'd be like, "Oh,
They harassed everybody.
that was funny." Endured what, 4 blocks of that.
I remember when I was dating Jose, someone in the family, like somebody married who has no value to me. But anyway, she basically goes, "Oh my God, he's such a nice guy, but does he have to be Dominican?" And I'm like, okay, well, yes. And he ended up being the most wonderful husband and man ever. And I'm like, do people just always have something to say? Like I brought him to Puerto Rico to meet Mami Goya, my grandma, which I'm glad I did. Everybody met him and somebody always had to say something.
Mami Goya and your grandpa, those were two. Your grandfather was black and Mami
My
Goya's was
grandfather was
cute.
black. My grandma was white with green eyes. And they were very racist to them about that. They would tell my grandma, "Why are you with him?" They treated him so bad. It was so sad. And I remember when we were kids, like, like now we say Afro Latino, we were conscious of that. But in Puerto Rico, when I was younger, we would say, like Sam, you said, we're all Puerto Rican. So even though he struggled more than my grandma as far as like how he looked, I think he was just Puerto Rican. He wasn't a black Puerto Rican, but he is a black Puerto Rican. He was a black Puerto Rican. He was an Afro Latino. Now that we know more, but I think that comes from a place of we're just all Puerto Rican. And I think when you come to this country, you see this division. But I think the reality is that, in a lot of these countries, you are what that culture is. And I think that we forget that. But at the same time, there is privilege in being a certain skin color and not being a certain skin color. And we need to honor that as well, because it's true.
And I think even for me being mixed, I always felt like even in high school, I wasn't white enough for the white kids. I wasn't Hispanic enough for the Hispanic kids. And so I just didn't try to fit in. And I've kind of even throughout my life stayed that way. Even at work, I work with predominantly men and, there's a whole boys club there and I don't try to inject. I don't want to be a part of something like that where there's exclusivity because of whether it's your race or gender or whatever. I don't want any part of that. And so you're going to respect me for who I am and that's it. And so, but that comes with confidence and that comes with, being intentional with that and having that boundary. But I also lived in this kind of gray area. Like people would forget, so people would talk Spanish and not realize I understand what you're saying, dumbass.
Same.
Or the other side of it where white people would say things and I'm like, wow, I know who you are now. Thank you.
I see you.
I see you.
Note, yep. Mental note in my head, like, great. But then there's also a privilege there because I get away with saying a lot of things that some people may not be able to say.
Right.
You can kind of interject both sides. So you kind of live in this gray area your whole life, or you feel like you live in a gray area.
And I think I want to add to that the gray area. I don't know, this is a little different, but I think it speaks more to like what I mentioned earlier about the bicultural experience. Like whatever you are, if you have a different culture at home and then you're raised in this country, I think, that is its own. For instance, if you grew up in New York, not just New York City, but New York in general, and like, the outside of New York, first of all, we have a culture all on our own. I think New York City, anybody who's from New York City listening, we have our own culture, the way we speak, the way we view things, our music, how we all like got together. And I think that's one thing. But I think that whole term of New Yorican is an example of, well, that's its own culture. And I don't think we realize that, I can only speak from my experience, but like if you go to Puerto Rico, and even though I was accepted, I don't really have any issues with not being accepted, but being called gringa and being like, well, no one in the States would call me a gringa, like a Caucasian girl. I mean, once in a while, but not really. Or over here, I'm not, I'm still an other, right? You're still an ethnicity that's different. That's not a Caucasian, even though we dominate numbers wise. But anyway, I digress. So I think that the empowerment piece is, well, we are our own culture. Like my whole clientele is first generation Latinos and Black. And I think that, we are our own culture, right? So now you're growing up in New York and you have a home where you have this rich food and culture and music and just these wonderful things about being from our culture, and then we're being raised here. I think that if you turn that, eventually you can turn that into that pride and that superpower of, well, this is what I am and this is its own culture and I love it. Right. Versus not being part of that and not being part of that. And I think like everybody's experience is different, but I think that as we see now, so many people grew up like us in different ways. And that is its own thing, being a first generation or second generation person from parents from another country. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
True.
Do we want to do pet peeves?
Sure.
Well, it was funny because I was thinking about them and I'm like, yeah, like someone that chews loud, somebody that talks in movies. And then I was like, oh, wait, I can't say those because Mark does all those things.
Oh,
And
no.
he's going to be like, I do all those things. And I'm like, yeah, you're annoying. So I changed them
Yeah, I mean,
to like
mine
my
are
real.
dumb. Mine are very shallow pet peeves, but
That's what they are. Pet peeves are
I
usually
know, but I
shallow.
don't know.
Your ick. What is that thing that gives you an ick?
Ick. You know what gives me an ick? Dirty
What?
fingernails.
Ooh, I don't
Especially
blame you.
men with dirty fingernails.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Dirty fingernails. I don't care who you are. Clean those fingernails. That is disgusting. It is disgusting. You find people who work with their hands. I get it. But when you get home, clean that shit.
No, when you get home from work,
There's a window. Yeah,
you
you
better
have
be a
10 minutes.
construction worker. You
You have
better be a construction worker. You have no other excuse.
correct.
Ugh.
And keep them short too. Keep them short. Victor used to always grow like his pinky nail, and I would be like, it was a Puerto Rican.
PR. That's a Puerto Rican thing. That's
Yeah. I don't. You look like
Puerto Rico.
you're snorting cocaine. People gonna
I
think
was
you're
just
doing
thinking
this.
that.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that people did that to.
Yeah. I said, cut that shit. That's disgusting. I use it to scratch. I said, cut that shit every week. Look at his nail. Cut it. Another one is, oh my God. I'm sorry if any of the other listeners use this, but those extra long, thick fake eyelashes.
I don't like them either.
The walls. They're just terrible. Stop it. Stop it.
It's not a good look.
No, I mean, I have one little I put on my end, like, I don't mind fake lashes. I use them too, but not those walls. Definitely not on the bottom. Definitely not.
No,
Because
and
it's
then the funny
unnatural.
thing is that the young girls do it a lot. And when you go to the store and they're dressed so casual, like they're working and they're dressed like in their like Walmart shirt or whatever, and then they got these crazy bright eyelashes because they're getting them done, they're extensions.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is a horror show.
It's
This
just
is so crazy.
horrible. It's horrible. And some of them are
Hilarious.
like walls. Like there's not even separation,
How do you see? That would bother me.
It just looks dumb. It looks stupid. Sorry. And the eyelashes on the car, even worse.
Eyelashes on the car? What do you mean?
Yeah. You know those little cars with the
stickers.
eyelashes
That
and the
on our
lights on the front
headlights.
lights?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Which brings me to my last pet peeve, my third one. I am sorry as well. I know your mom drove one, Melissa, but I hate Toyota Camry drivers.
What do you
Yeah.
mean?
Wait, you hate the car or the drivers?
Well,
car.
the drivers of that car are usually
Older
dumb
people.
ass drivers. Like I might not be able to put this, I might offend some people, but they're always look, if there's like traffic, bet you there's a Toyota Camry up in front. My God.
Oh my God, you're funny. You're crazy.
I bet you. All right, that's mine.
I'll give mine. This has always been my biggest pet peeve, and I guess people forget I went to school for this. But if I say that I am on a diet or I'm a particular exercise program, and somebody out of shape tries to give me advice, in my
I
head,
will not
I'm
be
like,
giving you advice.
I'm like, I don't want to be you. Like, why? Obviously, that shit don't work. What are you talking about? So that's my biggest pet peeve: the people out of shape giving diet and exercise advice. My second thing, and I do this too, and I check myself all the time. But like people, like when you're telling somebody something and then they try to give you a relatable story, like that bothers me. Only because number one, I'm very private. So I don't tell people my business. So if I'm telling you a story that's really like gut wrenching for me, and then you give me a relatable story, I'm like, okay, you didn't even hear anything I said. You're just in your mind, we're thinking of something to relate to your life when we're talking about me. Hello, I don't talk to many people. So, but I catch myself doing that too, because I think it's just kind of a natural human instinct to do that because we're relational creatures. So I have grace there. But I try to make sure that if somebody's telling me something, it's about them. Like it's their moment, ask questions. That's the compassionate part of me. Like, tell me more about it, trying to understand. I appreciate those people, which is why I have so few friends.
That's great.
And my last one, and I only discovered this a couple of months ago, but I guess it's always been there in the back of my mind, but it's a man that can't do push-ups.
What?
That's
Well, what
funny.
percentage of the population is that?
Listen, Mark and I went to a retreat, and in the morning they had workouts in the morning. And they're body work, like full body workouts, squats, lunges, push-ups, whatever. And there was a couple in front of us. And I'm trying to focus. This was kind of like, I've never really worked out with my husband. So this was kind of like a little competition between me and him. And, so I'm focused on me. But this man looked like a fish out of water. Like he was flopping around all over the place. And then he couldn't even do a push-up. And when we left, the first thing I said to my husband is, I just realized I don't like men that can't do a push-up. If I can kick your ass, feel safe. So if you can't even fucking do a push-up, how the hell are you protecting me? I can kick your fucking ass.
Right.
Like, I want to be with a man that is stronger than me, that is going to protect me. If you're flopping around like a fish and you can't even do a push-up, you can't hang with me.
No, you want to be in your feminine energy.
Exactly. And you could be a small guy as long as you got ninja moves. We're cool. But if you can't do a push-up and you can't protect me, like we can't hang.
True.
I'm sorry.
I have to go make Victor do a push-up now and make sure he
Give me 10 right now.
You're in a divorce if you can't do one.
But yeah, that's mine.
Go ahead.
I can't unless you're my person, my spouse, my boy, whatever, my guy or my kids. I don't like people in my personal space. I mean, or unless I initiate. So like, I mean, I'm affectionate, but I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about walking or talking to people and then they're coming at you and I'm like, yo, what the just like over there. This is it. This is my space. Pretend there's a color aura around me and just over there. I don't know. I don't know if it's the trauma from growing up in New York City where people were all up on you and I was used to it. Maybe now I don't like it. I don't know, but I feel like if I'm standing there and we're talking, you don't need to be in my space or you don't need to walk right behind me. So that's one. It really annoys me. Maybe, and also remember the parties where some women would get drunk and they'd come into your like dancing part, like we're dancing, having a good time. And then the drunk girl comes and like bumps on you. And I'm like,
the bumping.
like, this is so annoying. So that's one. The second one is chewing with your mouth open. Like, I don't understand that, and I'm like, that's a basic manner kind of thing. I don't know who didn't correct you. All these years, you're a grown person and you're like, it's gross. So I'm just like, that's a definite number two. And sometimes I'm like, I get grossed out. I don't want to eat anymore. Like, I'm like, oh, I don't want to eat anymore. This is like disturbing. And then the third is coming into the bed, not on the comforter. I give grace. Coming into the bed with street clothes on your sheets. Like that's just nasty to me because I'm like, your bed is your sanctuary and it should be clean. And you're coming from the street with street clothes and laying on your sheets. And like when I've seen people do that, I'm like secretly
or shoes on the bed too, like stuff like that.
Well, my husband's thing is the pajamas. People wear pajamas outside, and he's like, "That's disgusting." They go home and they go in their bed.
Oh yeah, no, that doesn't. Yeah, I agree because you're wearing them outside. It doesn't matter that they're pajamas. You're just wearing clothes outside, and now you're bringing them into your bed.
Even so, why are we wearing pajamas outside?
It's a thing. I don't know.
That's a dumb
Thank God
thing.
my kids don't do that. They've never gotten into it.
I have another one, and I can't believe I didn't think of this. I might have to cut out the Camry thing. I might offend too many people. Or maybe not.
It's funny.
Okay, then I'll keep it. But this one, I can't believe I didn't think of this. But when you were talking about people with their mouth open when they're eating, learn how to cut with a knife. When you're people grab their fork and they do this.
They do this.
Something like that. There's like variations of this. Like I think I do the European way, and
I've seen that. I've seen that.
They, oh my, like what?
Barbarians.
Grown people, yeah. Like even like I'm at a steakhouse, I look across and there's oh my God. My God. If any of you do that when you're sitting next to me, I'm correcting you.
I don't know.
I don't do
I
that
do
either.
cut my pizza. That used to irk Jose.
It's fine.
Jose used to get annoyed. He's like, no, this is you're
Grab
New
it like a
Yorker.
New
You're supposed to
Yorker.
fold it. Like you're supposed to fold the pizza.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's two different experiences. When you fold the pizza and you eat the pizza folded, that's a whole different experience as to like
That is.
just like the top.
To savor. I love pizza. I like to savor it. I don't want
Right.
to be like stuffing it in my mouth, like and folding it. Like
Uh,
it's just too thick. And I'm just never. I don't think I've ever eaten pizza like that.
if you want to put a picture of your parents, I can put it in at the end. People can see what, you know.
Picture. I just had it for my retreat.
Yeah.
I have a really
I have
nice
one.
picture, actually, of them at the Puerto Rican Day Parade.
Nice. All right, ladies.
All right.
That was a good one.